Welcome to Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, where we aim to take you to the heart of ag policy. I'm Spencer Chase. Our guest this week is Angela Coleman, Associate Chief of the U.S. Forest Service. She joins us to discuss this year's wildfire season and the state of America's forests. But first, here's this week's headlines. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative says it will not conduct a Section 301 investigation into claims that U.S. fruits and vegetables are suffering from unfair imports from Mexico. USTR instead promised to make an advisory panel to help southern produce farmers find relief. Lawmakers from Florida and a handful of other states pushed for an investigation over concerns that Mexico's produce was threatening American producers and setting prices that would harm American consumers. Other senators and national farm groups did not support the investigation because they say it would likely lead to retaliation. Federal economists are increasing their estimate of food price inflation for this year and the next. USDA's Economic Research Service is projecting supermarket prices will rise 11 to 12% this year and 2.5 to 3.5% next year. All categories have seen substantial price increases this year. A disease outbreak is leading to egg prices shooting up 21% compared to last year, while poultry prices are up 14%. Next year, cereals and bakery products are expected to rise 5 to 6%, while prices for poultry, fats, and oils are expected to rise 4 to 5%. And finally, dry conditions are having a big impact across many different facets of American agriculture. In the Midwest, river levels have dropped just as producers were heading to market with the 2022 harvest. Water levels at one critical point on the Mississippi River are about 11 feet lower than last year's measurements. In the West, dry conditions have persisted, leading to annual wildfire statistics already above 2021 levels. According to the National Interagency Fire Center, the 2022 acreage torched by fires is already more than 28,000 acres higher than last year's 7.12 million. But both this year and last are still comfortably below the more than 10.1 million acres burned in 2020. Angela Coleman brings more than 27 years of experience to her position as the second in command at the U.S. Forest Service. She says over those years, the fire situation and the conversation around it have both changed.
Obviously, I've been around a while, and we now call them wildfire years as opposed to seasons. And so the most intense part of the year, obviously, is the summer. And, in 2020 and 2021, we saw record years. We saw record acres burned. We stayed at a preparedness level of 5, which is our highest for a long period of time. So we came into this year with that same expectation. And we learned a lot, especially during this pandemic, of how we use resources. And while in comparison, this season progressed where we didn't stay at that high preparedness level of 5, we had plenty of fire activity on the landscape. And we continue to have above average ignitions of fire. And we had large swaths of acres burned, 7 million this year, above that. But in that, with the help of weather, we had favorable weather patterns this year, and with very aggressive initial attack efforts from our firefighters and strategic placement, pre-positioning of our resources, this year the agency was able to jump the majority of those fires that you didn't see those large, devastating impacts that we normally have seen in the record years, those large, destructive, catastrophic fires driven by the climate changes we've seen. Now, early in the season in the Southwest, we did see some pretty devastating activity, but by and large, the agency was very aggressive in the initial attack, and it paid off with the help of the weather, with the help of our resources being pre-positioned.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to circle back to the weather and some of the staffing concerns that you mentioned there. But before we do that, I do want to check and just see, obviously a big part of wildfire prevention is maintenance of the existing forest land. I wonder and there's been a huge maintenance backlog for years on the nation's federal forest land. What is the maintenance picture looking like right now? Does that backlog remain, or has there been some progress?
We're progressing, and we're doing that with our work across boundaries, because as you know, the fuels buildup we've seen, the results of the conditions made worse by the changing climate, and with the growth of people near forests, that's across all boundaries. And so through partnerships and work together, the agency is really looking at scaling up to the size of the problem. And we codified that this year with the release of a 10-year strategy that will allow the Forest Service, that calls for the Forest Service to do large-scale treatments, active treatments, to do mechanical and fire, use of prescribed fire to reduce fuels at larger landscapes, and we're calling them fire sheds, 250,000 acres, swaths across ownerships to reduce fuels. And so that work, with the help of the Congress's investment through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, really has helped to build momentum, to put the right treatments at the right scale in prioritized places, namely these high-risk fire sheds. The agency made quite a bit of progress in the initial year. We learned a lot, and we're scaling up to be even more effective going into 23.
We'll be right back with more from Angela Coleman at the U.S. Forest Service right after this.
Regenerative poultry production is a process by which nature can actually recapture and restore the energy that is being taken out of a space.
Farm Credit helped Rahi build his dream of regenerative poultry farming and encouraging fellow immigrants to find community in agriculture.
Nothing beats a farm. I'm just pursuing happiness.
Learn more at farmcredit.com/beginning.
Every morning, American corn farmers roll their sleeves up and start the work of growing a better future, one bushel at a time, with America's crop. A better future made possible by their unmatched sustainability practices and the extraordinary benefits and uses of corn throughout the global economy. And the National Corn Growers Association proudly supports and advocates for all they do, year in and year out.
Welcome back. Securing a stable firefighting workforce has long been a priority for the U.S. Forest Service. Associate Chief Angela Coleman says steps are being taken to make the position a more attractive one and to retain the folks that sign on.
Our firefighters are integral to our ability to do this work, and we need them in high volumes all across the country. And the agency is working hard to be competitive in a very competitive market for those skills, for those resources. And we know that there is a gap in our ability to compete, particularly now in this tough labor market. So with the help of the Congress's support through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, as well as the work at the department with our secretary, the agency made some progress to close the gap in competition. We bumped up salaries for this year for our firefighters. I believe 13,000 firefighters received a bump in salary this year. And we're hoping that is not a one-time deal, that we're working on a package that will mean long-term bump ups in salaries, but it's bigger than that. We also need to work on making sure that they have affordable housing to be able to live and make a living wage and keep their livelihood going. And we have to think about the long-term impacts of doing this kind of work. They need help in the benefits world for mental resiliency and mental health support, as well as their great support for physical healthiness when they go on the landscape. So the agency has invested to improve mental health resiliency as well with a new national contract with specialized training, specialized counseling ability for firefighters. So we're trying to close that gap to make the Forest Service a place where firefighters want to come and stay because they are essential to the work that we do on the ground.
So, I mean, you mentioned all of the efforts that have been undertaken on the salary and benefit side of things, but I wonder, how big is the gap between the workforce you have and the workforce you need, strictly from a numbers standpoint?
Well, the agency was pretty successful last year in attracting firefighters. We were shooting for somewhere around 11,300, I believe, firefighters, a little bit over 11,000 last year. This year we came pretty close. We got somewhere near 10,000, I believe, 900 or somewhere in that range. We were about 97% of the way. So I think the signals we're sending about the agency's seriousness about affecting their livelihoods and their welfare for the long term, I think that's paying off, but we have a long way to go. We have a lot of work to do, and looking forward to working with our leaders to do it.
You've talked a little bit about, throughout the interview, about the cooperation that the Forest Service has had with Capitol Hill, and I want to wrap up our conversation with that theme. The 2018 Farm Bill expanded the Good Neighbor Authority that the agency or the service is able to take advantage of. And I wonder, for those that maybe are not as steeped in the forestry landscape as you are, is there a good, what would you say is a good 20-second explanation of what Good Neighbor Authority is and what it allows the Forest Service to do?
It really does. It is a vehicle. It's one of the tools that's so critical to working across boundaries. It allows us to have agreements with states and tribes to actually come together, mutually agree on the work to be done, and then we fund states and tribes that way to get that work done. It really is at the core of the agency's philosophy around sharing leadership, sharing stewardship across boundaries. And the Good Neighbor Authority has been, frankly, a forerunner to the other work that we're doing at a larger scale. So it's a critical tool and one that we have really appreciated, and the expansion has only added to that.
So, I mean, that authority was expanded in the 2018 Farm Bill. How has that expansion been working? I mean, has it met your expectations, exceeded them? I mean, what has it allowed you to do that you couldn't prior to 18?
It allows us to increase the number of agreements across boundaries. And so, yeah, it's meeting our expectations and setting up some for how the Forest Service wants to work. But the bottom line, when we look at results, is how much work are we doing as a result? And the additional agreements we've made has translated to acres being treated, forests being restored, health and resiliency being increased. So we're pretty happy with that tool and really are grateful to the Congress for expanding it.
Well, and wrapping things up here with another look at something that's on the congressional agenda, the upcoming Farm Bill, potentially looking at rewriting that piece of legislation in 2023. I know that the Forest Service does not really get in the habit of writing farm bills. Maybe they provide technical assistance on questions that are asked. But as things sit here right now, what are some things that we should expect the Forest Service to be pursuing, maybe suggesting to the Congress in relation to the forestry and conservation language in that Farm Bill?
At this point, it's very early in that process, and so I want to just do it thematically. I want to just give a hint thematically. Anything that helps us to meet the public's expectations for creating resilient forests amid climate change impacts, we are looking for any help for that, from that vantage point, and anything that allows us to broaden our impact at the right scale across boundaries. I think the agency is strongly a willing and helpful partner in those deliberations. So looking forward to the work, because it certainly has helped us to this point.
What's the biggest need the Forest Service has at this point? Is it funding increases, or is it something like the 2018 bill where maybe it wasn't, the Good Neighbor Authority was not necessarily, it was more of a language tweak than it was perhaps more of a funding tweak? What do you think is a bigger need, funding or some language abilities?
It's a combination, in my opinion. I think it is knowing that we have reliable investments to not only change the trajectory of the fire risk on our landscapes, but to keep those fire risks low by continuing to maintain our work, by continuing to actively treat in a cyclical way. It's a long-term investments, I think, that we need. And it's also looking at how we continue to evolve policy to keep up with the complexity of impacts we're seeing from the climate, from people's needs. Those things have to work in tandem with one another. And that's one of the things we love about our agency. We're a multiple mission, multiple use agency, and sustainability across the landscape, not only for today's needs, but the future. That's what we're about. So you have to do those in combination, investments as well as policy.
Associate Forest Service Chief Angela Coleman, thanks for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
We'll be right back to hear from this week's panel But first, our Hannah Pagel takes a look at a critical risk management tool for producers in this week's Map It Out.
Farmers and ranchers who bought a crop insurance policy are seeing big benefits in areas that were hit hard by drought this year. The Rain Index Insurance policy protects pasture, rangeland, and forage when precipitation in the producer's area is below normal. 253 million acres were insured this year. This map from the USDA's Risk Management Agency shows rainfall index insurance loss ratios in 2022. You can see the highest loss ratios spread out across states in the West and Plains. Texas suffered one of its worst droughts in a decade this year. Producers who bought RI insurance on more than 38 million acres of rangeland and forage have claimed $714 million worth of indemnities. The RI policy has paid $1.6 billion to producers so far this year, compared to $1.4 billion in premiums. It's the third straight year with more losses than premiums. As for next year, interested producers have until December 1st to get covered for the 2023 growing season. For Agri-Pulse, I'm Hannah Pagel. Agriculture Future of America is a nonprofit building transformational leaders in food and agriculture. AFA prepares college students to join the workforce as innovative and engaged young professionals who will shape the future of agriculture. Head to agfuture.org to find out how you can get involved.
Welcome back to Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, where we're going to continue our conversation on wildfires and forest management with a panel of experts, joined this week by Christopher Martin, the state forester from the state of Connecticut, joined as well by Rita Hite with the American Forest Foundation, as well as Malcolm North with UC Davis. Appreciate all of you taking the time to join us. And Malcolm, I want to go to you first because as we look at these statistics that we're seeing so far on 2022, it's not going to be setting any kind of records in terms of wildfires and wildfire acreage burned, but there still is a decent amount of fire going on out there, topping 7 million acres this year. What do you attribute to the fact that fires are still happening, but not quite to a record pace? What do you think has caused that?
Yeah, always every year it varies so much depending on fuel conditions and climate, but particularly this year in the southern and the southwest area in California, which I'm in, it was a very small fire year, largely because we had a lot of summer thunderstorms, which really kept the fuels very wet. But the overall trajectory over the last few years has been for a really increasing rate of wildfire, and 2020 was the largest wildfire year we've had on record.
Well, and Christopher, I want to bring you into the fold here because, obviously a lot of times that wildfire season is discussed and wildfires are mentioned. The focus of a lot of folks kind of goes out west, and deservedly so. A lot of fires take place out there. But I wonder, how do during this the drier season, how do fires in forests in the Northeast and other parts of the country fare?
Well, we do have fires in the Northeast. Our forests are mainly a hardwood forest. And so they're not necessarily prone to the catastrophic, fast-spreading fires that we see in the news on the evening news in California and the West Coast. The problems we do see, though, are a combination of drought, persistent drought, and then insect damage leading to dead hardwood trees standing. We see fires in the eastern states. They tend to be on the ground. They tend to burn into the soil, and they're very, very difficult to put out.
So then with that in mind, Rita, when we hear about forest fires that are happening on a lot of federal and state-owned property, AFF obviously keeps its focus on the privately owned forests, but how are privately owned forests impacted by fires that might start on those federal and state-owned acres?
Yeah. So out west in particular, there's an intermix of public and private lands. So private landowners tend to be kind of in holdings inside of federal lands, and it's a patchwork. So, and fire doesn't respect ownership boundaries, right? So once a fire starts burning, if the fuel loads are there and we're not able to control it, it doesn't respect those ownership boundaries. And in fact, in the West, about a third of the high fire risk acres out west are owned by families and individuals and private landowners. So while we do have a big challenge on federal lands with respect to fuel loads, drought, climate-induced conditions, We also have very similar conditions on a lot of the private lands out west, and those landowners also need help and assistance to deal with the wildfire issues we're facing.
We'll be right back to talk Farm Bill, climate change, and more with our panel right after this.
Agriculture Future of America is a nonprofit building transformational leaders in food and agriculture. AFA prepares college students to join the workforce as innovative and engaged young professionals who will shape the future of agriculture. Head to agfuture.org to find out how you can get involved.
Welcome back. In addition to his role as the Connecticut State Forester, Christopher Martin is also the immediate past president of the National Association of State Foresters. He says that organization is appreciative of the expansion of Good Neighbor Authority that was included in the 2018 Farm Bill.
Well, it's really been a game changer for many states that have federal lands within their boundaries. It's really helped bring partnerships together, Forest Service folks, state agency folks, and NGOs. There's 38 states that have Good Neighbor Authority master agreements currently, and about 340 individual projects that have been successfully implemented or in the process of being implemented. Congress has seen this as a great success and provided another $200 million to add to the GNA work in the upcoming budget session. So we just see this as a home run. It's a real common sense approach. It's been a game changer in many respects to treat the forest health conditions, to reduce the wildfire risk, and get more work done on the ground.
Congress is looking at some updates in the 2023 Farm Bill across farm policy, but when you look specifically at the forestry language, Christopher, is Good Neighbor Authority, are there any further tweaks that NASF would like to see out of this language?
Well, I think there's opportunity to get the tribes and counties more engaged in Good Neighbor Authority agreements, and then also the ability to utilize those revenues from the increased treatments, health treatments, and fire reduction treatments for more active management on federal land and on other lands. So, with every good plan, it's always good to do the Deming check, right? Plan, do, check, and reevaluate, and that's being done. We do have some proposals in our Farm Bill platform that we think will be amenable and even improve on something that's working good already.
Well, and Malcolm, I suppose we should bring you into the fold here, because it seems as if perhaps the elephant in the room when it comes to discussing wildfires and wildfire mitigation is the impact of climate change and what impact that might be having on some of these fires getting going in the first place. What is your research telling you on that subject?
Well, I think any particular fire regime has a mix of both climate and fuels management questions, but particularly in forests, much of the problem is a fuels loading problem, which has been from suppressing fires over the years. But there are other systems, particularly Southern California, where you have chaparral and oak woodland systems. Those are much more driven by climate change effects. But the one thing we do know, of course, is climate change is increasing the length of the fire season and also tending to dry out the fuels. So if anything, it's kind of in the background of all these different systems pushing to increase the length as well as the intensity of fire season.
We talk about the lengthening of the fire season. What was it traditionally and what is it now?
Well, it varies place to place, but in much of the West, for instance, the fire season would often be something like June through October. And now a lot of research is suggesting it's at least 2 months longer on each end of that. So you've got April into sometimes even December. So there's been a pretty substantial increase in the season, the length of the season, and the need to hold firefighters on for a longer period of time than we have in the past.
Well, and Rita, we talked a little bit about this with Christopher earlier, but with the upcoming Farm Bill discussions taking place, wonder what do you think are some of the forestry-specific issues that Congress is going to be faced with as they look to update that legislation?
Yeah, so there's a number of issues that private and family forest owners face, and by the way, private and family forest owners make up about 40% of our forests in the U.S. So they're the largest chunk of our forests in the U.S. And they're families and individuals. There's 21 million people that own forests in the U.S. 1 in 4 rural Americans is a forest owner, right? So lots of intersection with farmers. Lots of forest owners are farmers too. So we're looking at, a lot of these challenges that family landowners face, from the wildfire crisis that we were just speaking to a basic challenge in that 85% of family forest owners don't currently have professional help from a forester and have a management plan. So we've got a big challenge in how do we help families care for their lands so that they can have an asset for their family and themselves and keep it and pass it on, but also provide all of those public benefits that we all rely on, from clean water and air and habitat and timber supplies and a whole host of other things. And so we're looking at this next farm bill and saying, let's continue the great work that Congress has already done to provide resources for forest owners right alongside farmers. And actually the bills recently passed, like the Inflation Reduction Act, provide a lot of resources. But the other key thing that we're seeing is there's an increasing need for forest owners to be able to participate in things like carbon markets, new emerging markets that provide another financial mechanism for them to care for their land. And so we see a big opportunity for this next farm bill to help unlock and leverage those carbon markets right alongside a lot of the conservation dollars that the farm bill is longstanding provided, so that family forest owners, we can get beyond, move beyond the current 15% that have help and help a whole heck of a lot more.
There's been a lot of conversation within farm policy lately, whether it was within the conservation funding and those pieces of legislation that you mentioned. Also things like the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities that has been undertaken by the Biden administration. I wonder, do you think forestry is getting a big enough piece of the conservation pie, either when we're talking about actual funding, when we're talking about just the discussion? Rita, is that something that you think there's an adequate recognition of the potential of forestry?
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, we've made incredible strides. USDA, NRCS, Farm Service Agency, and the Forest Service have all been incredible partners for forest owners. There's more we can do to enhance the forestry tools available for forest owners. And in fact, the Inflation Reduction Act has $20 billion for forestry and agriculture and climate smart forestry and ag. And there's specifically about $450 million in that bill to help small family forest owners participate in climate smart actions and unlock carbon markets. So really promising things. What we're also excited about is the climate smart commodities opportunity that you mentioned. USDA has actually expanded the dollars available for that. And the American Forest Foundation was actually a recipient of one of those grants. And we're really excited about the potential for that funding to help unlock markets for landowners and unlock ways for our forest products, the products that we produce from our forests, from paper and packaging to solid wood products, to actually be able to be marketed in a way that recognizes the climate value of our forest products, in addition to the good forestry that we're doing on the ground.
So a number of things to watch on this subject as we look for the upcoming farm bill, as we monitor the current state of the wildfire years as opposed to wildfire seasons that we're seeing now. But we appreciate all of you taking a little bit of time to join us. Panel, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more Agri-Pulse Newsmakers. But first, our Hannah Pagel takes a look at Florida's citrus production in this week's Ag by the Numbers.
Florida's citrus production was already projected to be lower this year. But the industry is experiencing even more struggles because of Hurricane Ian. This chart shows the volume and values of Florida's citrus production from the 2012 to 2013 season to the forecasted totals for the 2022-2023 season. Keep in mind, USDA's October forecast for citrus does not include losses from Ian. All Florida orange production was projected to be down by 32% from last season. Grapefruit production is expected to be down 40%, and tangerine and tangelope production is expected to be down 7%. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services estimated Hurricane Ian caused anywhere from $1.2 billion to $1.9 billion in damage to Florida agriculture. Damage estimates for the citrus industry fall anywhere between $417 million to $676 million. According to the state's report, most of the citrus losses were due to fruit dropping from the trees, damage to branches, and the effects of heavy rainfall and flooding. More than 375,000 acres of citrus production were affected. Florida has more than 55 million citrus trees. The industry is estimating that 8 to 11% of trees were lost. Reporting for Agri-Pulse, I'm Hannah Pagel.
Farmers are always there for each other. We shed tears together, we celebrate together, but we also grow together. Farm Bureau is the largest general farm organization in the country. We have the farmers' back. If you're a farmer and you're not a member, we would welcome you into our Farm Bureau family. And if you want to know more about agriculture, come be part of this great family.
Thanks again for tuning in for another episode of Agri-Pulse Newsmakers. Before we let you go, here's what's on the horizon for the upcoming week. The Agri-Pulse team will be hitting the road to cover several big events. Sarah Wyant will be in Las Vegas, where the Western growers will host their annual meeting Wednesday through Saturday. Steve Davies will be at the Syngenta Media Summit in New Orleans. And finally, USDA will release multiple monthly reports, including looks at agricultural prices, fats and oils, and dairy products. We'll have reports on our travels and more in our coverage on agripulse.com. For Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one. Newsmakers is a production of Agri-Pulse Communications. For more ag policy news, visit agripulse.com. You can also find our new content on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow Agri-Pulse and our correspondents on social media to get breaking news and more.